Welcome back, everyone. We hope you're well fed. We hope you're well rested because it is time for some tennis. There we go. Let's get a nice little background there up. Welcome, everyone, to Eat Sleep Tennis. I'm Alex Christensen, and joining me, as always, just the American edition today, folks. Steve is asleep. That's kind of how it goes. You know, you're out there. He's on the other side of the world. It can be tough. But how are you, Candace? Just you and me. I think we can get it done. I'm not worried.
I'm doing well. I'm always been an Olympics person. I mean, this year, obviously, all things considered, feels a little bit weird, but still, I'm sure once we get into the swing of things today, I'm going to be like, who cares about COVID Olympics? Because that's just kind of who I am with the Olympics every time. So I'm very excited.
Me too. Let's jump in. We've got the tennis draw. We'll start with the men's draw here, and then we'll get to the women's. Oh, let me get rid of this here for a second. There we go. Nope.
This is why we need
Steve. I'm not sure at this point. What do? I just get it. There we go. Nothing is the answer. Here's the first quarter. As usual, Mr. Novak Djokovic is up there as the top seed. Unfortunately, Rublev continues his bad luck. I hear these draws are random, but he just seems to always be in Djokovic's quarter. The poor kid, looking goofy in pictures with his teammates, probably going to lose to Djokovic here. It is tough to see this as anybody but Djokovic's quarter. I mean, it just... Man, what a great path he's got just to get to the semifinals. What do you think here, Candace? Can anybody beat him?
You always look at these types of tournaments a little bit differently because it's not best of five, right? And so you always feel like, or at least I always feel like, the big names are a little bit more vulnerable because there are oftentimes during the course of a major, maybe we'll see them drop a first set and then they're able to come back. But, when you're talking best of three, that's a little bit more dicey. Djokovic's draw for mine isn't necessarily a cakewalk, though it's not necessarily super difficult either. We'll talk about it when we get to the women as well. At least I noticed it in both, but it's a real testament to how dominant Djokovic is against everybody, not named Nadal, I suppose, at this stage, that you can see a draw like his, which for anybody else, I think would be a very difficult draw. And yet when I went through and did my bracket, I'm like, Djokovic. So it shows you kind of the level or how much of a gap there is between those big names still and most everybody else. I mean, you have a couple of young guys making their way up, but still most of the pack is very far behind. I like Djokovic to potentially play Struff there, assuming he makes it through the first round match, which he should. And then things get interesting. The likes of Musetti versus Millman should be a lot of fun. Whoever comes out of that, someone like a Davidovich Fokina as well, very interesting. And then, as you mentioned, Rublev. I mean, the difficulty you would imagine in Djokovic's draw, which we'll see when we get down to the next quarter, is not only does he have Rublev here in his quarter, but obviously you have someone like Zverev right there underneath, and then the second quarter as well. So I think he has a tough draw, to be perfectly honest with you. I just think he's a lot better than everybody else. I personally have Rublev beating him, but I think that's probably more of a willing somebody to beat Djokovic, and he's just the guy who fits the bill in that spot. Unlike many of the top players who Djokovic has a storied history of dominating, that's not the case for Rublev. So at least maybe a little bit of an unknown factor with those two facing each other. Could see the Russians seeing it through, but I fully admit it's more of a hope than necessarily me thinking it's for sure going to happen. I just think Djokovic ultimately is under the odds for how difficult his draw is, and so I just need him to lose some more.
Yeah, I was looking. His first tough match for me was Musetti there in the third round. Curious to see what Musetti can do. Let's remember this is best of three, not best of five, and even the final is best of three. They went through and adjusted that. So Novak obviously in more danger. We have a little more variance there in three sets. I'd feel a little better about Rublev, but I wonder how he's going to do against Nishikori there in the first round. I know that there are no crowds. But, I mean, Nishikori is a really great tennis player. I'm sure he's been building up to this moment. He has a strong sense of his country and playing for Japan and things like that. A lot of it's qualitative. But at the end of the day, I have Djokovic moving through here, and you'll see a little bit later. Further than that, he's just the best player. And unless he comes out and kind of has an off day or is maybe tired from spending too much time with the Belgian gymnastics team, who knows what's going to happen. Anything is possible. Again, we've got three sets here, but I've got Djokovic coming out. Any other thoughts here in the first quarter?
I think the only other thing I would add, and I know we talked about this with Djokovic for Davis Cup, but Djokovic himself as a person, and obviously Serbia a little bit, very kind of a nationalistic country. So getting something like a gold medal is really important, and I think that's something you always have to keep in mind for sports like tennis or golf and the Olympics, where the Olympics is not a major, it's not their premier tournament. So sometimes you look to, or I look to, individuals who have shown a great interest in the Olympics or countries that, it is really, really meaningful to them to win a gold medal. Not to say it doesn't mean a lot to everybody, but you do kind of see those tendencies a little bit. And so it just is something to keep in mind.
Yeah, Andy Molitor and I talked a little bit about it on Brown Bag Bets, and it's exactly what you said. I mean, this is getting a gold medal is cool. It's not as important as winning a slam for most of these players. And tennis, one of the most curious things, frankly, about handicapping tennis is you got to do some social media homework. So if you're thinking about backing someone, go through, pull up, see how excited they are, if they've talked about it in any sort of interviews, because there are certain players here that I think are definitely more excited to play for their country and get the gold than the others. So something to keep kind of in the back of our head. And I like what you said there about Novak. I think this is meaningful for him for sure.
Yeah, and probably meaningful for players, not that we have a ton of them here, just the state of men's tennis at the moment, but probably more meaningful to players who have won a major too, because you've made your way through that barrier. And so, adding on something like an Olympics, you're trying to fill out the resume always, right? So I do think you have a little bit more of a sense there as well with that initial kind of barrier out of the way.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Second quarter, Zverev at the top here, Hubie Hurkacz at the bottom. Again, not too many interesting names. It's a pretty good tournament in terms of the big names being here, but I looked, a lot of the second-tier guys aren't here. I know we've heard Fanini talk about Sinner and Berrettini and his disappointment at them not being here. This quarter a little bit better. We got Sonego in here, Karatsev and Tommy Paul there. Whoever comes out of that first-round match should be interesting. I do have Zverev moving through this quarter, as is going to kind of be a theme for me in this draw. I think that, you look at these quarters, there's kind of a clear top dog to me in each one, and it's just tough for me to find anyone that's going to kind of upset that apple cart. Now, maybe it could be Karatsev here, but you look down, it's actually like one of them, again, it's not the best section in the world, but he still has to beat Hurkacz even just to get to Zverev. So how do you see this one shaking out, Candace? Who do you have winning the second quarter?
I look at it very similarly to you. I have Zverev making it through. I don't think that he has a really difficult draw by any stretch of the imagination. And that bottom portion, as you kind of alluded to, for mine is messy. I mean, you look at Karatsev potentially playing Tommy Paul, then maybe someone like a Jeremy Chardy, who is never an easy out, even at this stage of his career. And then, as you mentioned, maybe Hurkacz. So that's not a super hard section. He should be able to make it through, but it's just a tricky one, and a tricky one enough that I think you could take kind of the edge off of him. And, unfortunately, if he's playing Zverev, he needs to have everything in the tank. So I have Zverev making his way through this section. And, potentially, as you mentioned, you had Djokovic going through the first quarter, so potentially, meeting up with Djokovic, who will have likely just played Rublev.
Yeah, that's what I'm excited for here. I think we are going to get a Zverev-Djokovic match there in the semifinals. And Zverev's beaten him, I think, twice, at the very least once, and it's a big event. So that should be quite a bit of fun. Again, I think that this particular tournament, the men's tournament, there's a couple first-round matches I'll watch. Like I said, Karatsev, Tommy Paul should be pretty good. But I'll probably wait until the later rounds to watch too much of this. But we both like Zverev here. Anything else to add before we jump into the third?
No, I think that quarter is fairly straightforward.
The third here, Stefanos Tsitsipas down at the bottom, Diego Sebastian Schwartzman there up at the top. As you start to look down in the middle, Tiafoe Kwan, that'll be a fun first-round match. Curious to see what a bear can do. Khachanov should be able to take care of Nishioka, but we know that he always gives people a little bit more trouble. What do you see here in the third?
I think for me, as we move down this draw, I progressively get more excited by potential betting opportunities. This is where it starts to kind of open up a little bit for me. You look towards the top, you mentioned someone like a Schwartzman and a Khachanov. You're absolutely accurate that Nishioka, for some reason, tends to give people trouble in these first-round matches, even big names. But I do see him making his way through. Nishioka does have a bit of a habit of maybe making inroads against a top player and then it all kind of coming to a crumbling, horrible end. So I think Khachanov making his way through there against potentially the likes of James Duckworth and Schwartzman. So again, not necessarily easy matches. They're ones that could be a little testing, but I think he'll make it. Yes, exactly. But I think he'll make his way through that portion of the draw. The bottom portion for me is really interesting. I had that Kwon Tiafoe match circled as well. I think Kwon will make it through, but that should be potentially the most fun first round match, I think, of the entire tournament. But the real kind of unknown or X factor, I suppose, is Tsitsipas. Where is he at right now? Obviously we saw him go on that tear, and then we saw him, I don't want to say fall off a cliff, but certainly not show the same amount of prowess. So where is he at right now? I think that is the big question. And that's really what's going to decide this quarter. He as well does not have a super easy portion. Kohlschreiber should be fine at this stage of his career, but if it was Kwon or Tiafoe, and then somebody like a Kekmanovic, again, guys who are just going to make you work a little bit and are not necessarily good enough to beat top players on a regular basis, but they're consistent with their levels. That's the big key for me, is it's not some of these kind of all or nothing type of players. He's going to be playing relatively consistent players for the level that they're at. So if he slips, he'll probably be in trouble. But I have Khachanov beating Tsitsipas. The two of them have obviously played each other in recent years, and they've had many close matches. If you look back to Rotterdam, of course, Tsitsipas was able to win, but he dropped that first set to Khachanov. And I just wonder if right now where we're at, if the Russian is just in a little bit stronger, more consistent form. Tsitsipas, for mine, I just don't know where to put him. And, maybe after we watch a match or two, we'll have a better idea. But at least for now, I have the Russian beating him in this quarter.
Yeah, I agree. This is a tougher quarter for Tsitsipas than I think people think, and we'll talk a little bit more about his value from that right perspective later. But I think his chances are being a little bit overestimated given how tough this quarter might be. You ready to jump to the fourth and final?
I'm ready.
Medvedev at the bottom, Pablo Carreño Busta there at the top. Not the easiest quarter in the draw, but I think, again, as I mentioned earlier and kind of tipped my hand to this, I think that it sets up nicely for Medvedev. He really avoids the best players in this quarter until the quarterfinals. With all due respect to Fognini, I know he's upset, but usually that doesn't mean he gets too focused on tennis. And I know Steve isn't here. I'll just mention Sumit Nagal here, right down there at the bottom. But we'll see if he can beat Easterman, although Easterman's been pretty poor. I think he needs a new pair of goggles or something. We'll see. But Medvedev's toughest match until the quarterfinals is honestly this first one, probably against Bublik here in the first round. So what do you see here in the fourth quarter? Do you agree with me that it's Medvedev's, or is there another name you had circled?
I have another name circled. I obviously understand Medvedev, and he's very accurately the favorite in this section. I agree with you completely that Bublik, probably the most difficult match that he faces, at least for the first 3 rounds or so. So we'll see how he's able to kind of deal with that right off the bat. A little bit of a challenge, because sometimes we have seen him struggle in the beginning of tournaments. He kind of works his way into things a little bit. But the name that I have circled in this portion of the draw, and I'm very excited about it, is Felix. I was really impressed with what we saw from Felix at Wimbledon. Obviously, we spoke quite a bit, actually, before that tournament about his insane grass court statistics. So we have to see if that was simply a grass court thing. But I just think more than anything, he just needed something good to happen, right? This is a guy that we know has all the talent in the world. Obviously, he's made very noteworthy coaching changes. And I think there's been a lot of pressure on the Canadian, and he just needed something good to happen. And I felt like we saw that at Wimbledon, a little bit of a confidence boost. His draw for mine is fine. I mean, Murray, obviously, I just don't think his tennis is, where we think of him to be at this stage. So I'm not terribly concerned there in the first round. Then you're talking about someone like maybe a Koepfer or a Tennys Sandgren or, maybe a PCB, but nobody too crazy. I think he should be able to see his way through that section, and then it goes him against Medvedev. And they haven't played against each other for several years, but for mine, I think his game matches up well against Medvedev. We'll see if he's able to do it. Obviously, moving through the course of a tournament as you get closer to that final is always a bit of a concern for him. But for mine, the level we saw from Felix at Wimbledon, and again, it's whether or not he can continue that form is the question. I think that he can beat almost anybody. It's all in his head. It's a matter of him being able to have the confidence to push through and not get nervous in those moments. And I just think Wimbledon for him mentally maybe meant even more than what we saw from him physically.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like FA. I think you're right. He could definitely pop here, but he has one of the toughest spots in the draw. I think that, like you said, Murray's going to fight hard there in that match. Koepfer, I think, is probably a tougher out than people give credit. And then it's probably PCB, who loves these slow hard courts. I mean, this is a really nice setup for him, or even Cilic, who's done well in the Olympics. And all of a sudden he's in the quarterfinals. It's probably Medvedev there. It's just so tough for anybody in that top section. I could see PCB stealing this quarter, to be perfectly honest. That's who I would pick if I had to go somebody other than Medvedev. But I think you're right. FAA, I wish he had a better spot. I wish we could get him somewhere, maybe in that third quarter there, or up in the second quarter, somewhere like that. This is just a tough spot for him. All right. Any other thoughts on the draw in general before we go into our picks?
Nope.
All right. Let's get into that then. We do have Steve's picks. So that's good. We can talk nicely about them. We can make fun of them. But let's start with our aces here. Candace, who did you pick to win the gold?
I don't even remember. I did this yesterday. For me, who I picked to win the gold, did I pick Djokovic? Oh my gosh.
You picked Mr. Alexander Zverev.
Oh, you are correct. I did pick Zverev. Oh my gosh. This is what happens when you do this the day before. I picked Zverev to win the tournament, and that is because I told you guys a little bit there in the beginning. So basically, going back to that first quarter, I had Rublev beating Djokovic, and I mentioned, it's a little bit of a hope. But I think more importantly than that, the likelihood of Djokovic having to play Rublev and then Zverev is very high, and that's a tough double for anybody to have to deal with. So I think Zverev is the one who actually has the advantage in that top half, because he's kind of that second one coming through against Djokovic. So for mine, I look for him to be able to make it his way through, and I'm sure he'll be hoping that Rublev either beats Djokovic or pushes him really hard there. Obviously, again, you're dealing with best of three. So for a guy with the conditioning of Djokovic, there's only so hard you can make it. But I know that next tier player, they'll take anything they can get.
That's good that Steve wasn't here, because we pretty much ripped Tsitsipas for a good couple of minutes there. Steve's got Tsitsipas winning. I know a couple other folks that do as well. Obviously, we disagree with that. I'll talk a little more pointedly about that later. I didn't get cute. I just picked Djokovic. I know it's lazy and it's boring, but he's the best tennis player in the world. We're on hard courts. There's no Rafa or anybody like that who I really think could kind of test him in some of these matches at a high level. He is, I think, out to minus 180 certain places to win this tournament. We're getting close to like 1.55 range, kind of that, if you're a decimal odds person. That's just, oh my gosh. And maybe it's a little too much, but he's in a fairly decent spot. Yes, he might have to beat Rublev and Zverev just to get to the semifinals, but that's fine. He's going to be a big favorite in those matches. So, all right, I gotta do it. I gotta pick him to win. As boring as that is.
Oh man, I mean, somebody here had to do it. So
they did, but that's why we have the value picks. And Steve took Zverev, which I agree. I actually saw him take that, so I picked another name. Zverev's right around 12-1, and as we talked about, has a nice smooth quarter. Will face Djokovic before the final, which I think is actually an advantage. I think getting to him before that final is ideal. And again, Zverev's beaten him at least once, if not twice before. I think at 12-1, that's a really nice number when you consider things like Tsitsipas right around 5.5, 6-1. Medvedev's right around 5-1. Zverev should be much closer to those numbers. And you did just talk about this man, Candace, but anything else to add on Felix? What price were you looking for him at?
So my value play is Felix. I know when I looked yesterday, I was seeing him around 25, 28. I think Bet365 and a couple places had him around that quote. So to me, he's kind of nice in that he's down there at the bottom. Yes, Medvedev, but I think a lot of times we tend to try to find guys who are against Medvedev just because of those top players. He's maybe perhaps the least imposing, or maybe the least consistent or reliable. But for me, that price was nice for a guy who's coming into this in form, and again, coming into it with a much needed confidence boost. I think really when you would hear Felix throughout the most of the year, you could tell he was feeling that pressure, right? Kind of the weight of the world was put on him, and I think he was really feeling that. And I wonder how difficult it was for him as well at points to see Shapovalov having quite a bit of success, or even someone like Tsitsipas. These guys that are kind of the younger kind of group that are so often grouped together, starting to find some success, and yet he was still kind of languishing in those finals. But we know that when he's there and his headspace is right, he's really reliable. I think for as much as we focus on the fact that he struggles to win in finals, and that's everyone's focus with Felix. I think from a betting perspective, sometimes the focus should be how often he's making finals, right? That's a really good thing. And so the more that he does that, he's going to break through. It's just kind of an odds thing at some point. I mean,
It's a matter of time.
yeah, exactly. And so for him, from what we saw from Wimbledon, I'm choosing to look at it from kind of the glass half full perspective that he's playing well now. He did well at a very large tournament, one of the most prestigious in the entire game. And for me, again, this is a guy who very consistently is making his way through kind of the meat of these tournaments. And when you talk about that group of players below the top ones, so often that's the thing that you're lacking, right? You have guys who you don't know if they're going to lose first round or if they're going to make their way to the final. And with Felix, that's not necessarily the case overall.
Talked a little bit about Zverev. I also like Medvedev's price here. So you look at the prices at the top of the market. Again, I mentioned Djokovic right around minus 180. I think that gets you pretty close to, again, like 1.55 is somewhere in that range. Then you have Medvedev here, who's at plus 450. 4.5 to 1. Then you have Tsitsipas 5.5 to 1, and Zverev right now 11 to 1, 12 to 1, depending on where you are. I don't understand why there's such a wide range between Tsitsipas and Zverev. Again, I'd have Zverev in single digits. I'd have Tsitsipas a little higher, but I'd probably also have Medvedev a little bit lower. We're on hard courts. He's one of the best. I mean, besides Djokovic, it's him. It's pretty clear. Yes, these are a little bit slow. Yes, he hasn't had a ton of success in this time zone, in this area of the world, in the few tournaments he's played. This is a little bit different, though. He's had some time to be there as a result of some of the COVID restraints and things. A lot of these athletes have been there. They're not showing up, a day or two before. They've been there for 4 or 5, some up to 6 days, even a week. They've gotten acclimated and everything. As we just talked about, I look at his spot in the draw. If he can get past Bublik there in the first round, which he's a huge favorite to do, I think he cruises to the quarterfinals, and I'm not too worried about Tsitsipas in the semifinals if he's even there. So happy to back Medvedev as well at some of the numbers we're seeing.
I mean, the other thing I would say, and it's kind of funny because we so often lament the lack of value in these men's tournaments, and I think that's completely not the case here. You already rattled off a couple of guys, Medvedev. We've talked a bit about Zverev. I talked about Felix. I mean, even somebody like Rublev, I've seen him floating around 20 to 25 to 1 in places. To me, I would be more willing to take that kind of a price about an unknown for Djokovic, right? People are hopping on some of these shorter prices. Even someone like Zverev at least has beaten Djokovic, but sometimes people hop on shorter prices who have played a player and they've played them hard or played them close. But there's a known there. The known is that they lost, right? Rublev and Djokovic have never played each other. So we don't know what would come out from that. And if you're telling me 25 to 1 with the potential for him to go against Djokovic and then maybe Zverev to make the final, I find that intriguing enough from a price perspective. So again, for as much as we lament the lack of value in so many of these men's tournaments, I think because we have Djokovic and not Nadal here, that allows for there to be quite a bit of value underneath if you can, if you have a couple players that you really like.
Yeah. Unforced error here. Steve and I came to agreement on Hugo Dellien. He's played just 3 hard court matches in the last 52 weeks. He's lost all 3. He draws Novak Djokovic in the first round. Thanks for coming out, Hugo. Steve's overvalued player. Of course, he's wrong about this. Daniel Medvedev. Again, I think, trying to guess what Steve's thinking is here. They are slower courts, which isn't great for Medvedev. He has struggled in this time zone. And maybe there is someone else that is a little more motivated, a little more focused. Maybe he isn't feeling the rah-rah kind of Russia joy, if you will, playing for the Olympic Committee as opposed to the country. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's tough trying to speak for Steve. He lives on the other side of the planet. His life's backwards. He's asleep right now. It's very strange.
Yeah.
Your overvalued player, Candace. Not much of a surprise here, but it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when you're talking about a guy who's sitting around 4 to 7 in most places and is likely going to have to play Rublev and Zverev, that's a really, really tough draw. And we talked about it again, and I think this shouldn't be kind of confused in that when we talk about our overvalued player, that doesn't necessarily mean we don't think the player can win. It just means that we don't think they're worth a bet. So that's kind of what I was alluding to in that I think Djokovic has a difficult draw, and yet he's so dominant. I had him winning, most all of those matches. So could he win this tournament? Absolutely. Will my money be on him at 4-7? Absolutely not.
Makes perfect sense to me. My overvalued player, talked about this a little bit, hit on it a few times. I think Tsitsipas is someone that is getting a lot of credit here. It's been a little while since we've seen him play. I think his draw is very tough. That second round match, whether it be Tiafoe or Kwon, is going to be very challenging. The rest of his quarter is very tough. Then he has to beat Medvedev, and he has to play Djokovic in the final. Again, if I'm trying to go against Djokovic, it's someone that I think can beat him in that final. Not that Tsitsipas can't, but I'm not feeling so great about that. I would love for him to get – I'd feel much better if he had a chance to do it before the final, though. So, again, around 5.5 to 1, I'd have him closer to 7 or 8. I'd take Zverev from 12, probably have him down there at 8 or 9. Those two should be more or less the same. So, no value in Tsitsipas' number here, despite the fact that, sure, he can play some great tennis and win. Why not? It's been a fun year for Greeks.
Absolutely.
Are we ready to talk about the women's draw?
Your voice already sounds more excited.
How could I not be? It's a lot more wide open. Things are more interesting. Let's start here with the top quarter, of course. Let's get that out of the way. We've got Ashley Barty here as our number 1 seed. The red-hot Barbara Krejcikova down there at the bottom is our seed. Leylah Fernandez is playing the human MTO in the first round. Belinda Bencic and Pegula there in the first round. Some pretty fun matches here. I think even Vera Sevastova could be pretty solid. What do you see here from the first quarter? Who do you have coming out?
It's a fun first quarter. You mentioned some of those names: Sevastova, Pavlyuchenkova, Jessica Pegula in there. Your favorite, Leylah Fernandez, in there as well as with Krejcikova. So it's a fun section. I think for me, I wish that not the bulk of those names were kind of in that bottom portion, because I think they're going to beat each other up a little bit. So that makes things a little bit difficult. I have Ashley Barty coming through the quarter. I think if you had to be in this first quarter where there are a number of dangerous names, she's right at the top, which is the best spot to be, less likely to face a number of them. So for me, I went straight to the world number 1, Ashley Barty.
I think Barty is definitely the favorite to win this quarter, and I did pick her to win. But my strategy in this tournament, the Women's Olympics, if you go back to the last 3 or 4, has a history of a couple names that are not, top 5, top 10 WTA players, not some of the names you would expect popping through. For example, Monica Puig won the gold in 2016. I'm going to be honest, she hasn't really won much, if anything else, since then. Very fun player. That was really great. But you go through, you see some things like that in 2012. I can't remember the exact name, but it was a Russian woman of a higher ranking that snuck through and won her quarter and made the semifinals. So, and I'm looking at it here. I wish Pegula didn't have to play Bencic in the first round, but I really am excited to see what Pegula can do here. She is someone that's talked about being excited about being here. She played just about as well as any woman on hard courts at the beginning of the season, and I think has been a little bit forgotten, having struggled during the clay and grass season. I think she has a chance to make it through, and I'm curious to see what Pavlyuchenkova can do as well. She is someone that has the game and the mental fortitude to beat somebody like Barty. Those first 2 matches are pretty easy, and if she can sneak past Barty, maybe we'll see kind of a French Open style run from her here. So those are my 2 kind of other names, but I agree. I think it's Barty. Maybe it is Krejcikova. Maybe she just continues beating everyone forever. But at some point, I think she's going to run out of gas here a little bit. And, Fernandez or Yastremska there in the second round is going to be kind of tough. She's going to have to play Pegula probably in the third round, maybe Bencic, and then Barty just to win the quarter. So I think it's a little tougher for her as opposed to some of those women in the top. So like Barty, but Pegula and Pavlyuchenkova caught my eyes, some maybe longer shots. What do you think? Any other thoughts on this quarter?
No, except that I completely agree with Pegula. I actually had it shaping up as Pegula against Barty. So if you were looking for
like that,
a little bit of something on her, I certainly wouldn't put you off of that at all.
Yeah, she's like 50 to 1, 60 to 1 places.
Yeah, enough to take a little stab.
That's what you got to do. Sprinkle. Aryna Sabalenka, our top seed here in the second quarter. Garbiñe Muguruza down there at the bottom. But again, some fun names here. Kudermetova has got Muguruza in the first round. Petra Kvitovva's there in the middle. Elena Rybakina. Rebecca Peterson, the Swede, starting to play a little bit better. Garcia Vekic could be an interesting first round match. What do you see here in the second quarter?
This is where we start to get into a lot of fun, right? That first round match, Sabalenka against Magda Linette, that already jumps up the page as a really fun one there to kick things off. You mentioned Garcia. Whenever she's on, we know that she is that type of player that can redline and can get big names into trouble rather quickly. For me, though, I found myself leaning towards Rybakina coming through this section. I think she has a nice little pocket. Obviously, Sam Stosur there to start. Second round shouldn't be all that difficult, and then potentially playing, Sabalenka or Garcia. But regardless, those first two matches should allow her to kind of ease her way into things a little bit. The bottom portion, a lot of fun with Paolini in there and Muguruza. Really want to see where Muguruza is at this stage. I feel like her season has been a little bit of a roller coaster. At times in the season, she's looked near unbeatable, and at times she couldn't win a match at all. So where she's at is, I think, going to be really interesting to see, and we should get a nice test of that against Kudermetova to begin things. But for me, I'm looking to Rybakina to make it through. I think this is a player who probably deserves more credit than she's gotten for the year that she's had. Obviously, we talked quite a bit about her in the beginning of the season and how well that she was doing. And then things kind of slowed down a little bit. But all in all, she's had a really, really nice year, for what is a really rising, player in the WTA game. So I look for her to make her way through the quarter. And I think her season as a whole has been a little bit underrated.
Yeah, she has been losing matches, but it just has had tough draws, is running into really good players, has a nice run at Wimbledon, but then runs into Sabalenka, who she almost beats, honestly. Just been some tough draws for her. This is a nice spot. Yes, she might run into Sabalenka again, but we'll see how that goes. Muguruza, like you said, she could win this quarter, or she could lose this first round match to Kudermetova. It's kind of almost anything's possible, but it's just such an easy section here because Kvitova is very good, but we've seen her struggle a little bit, especially since the injury at the French Open press conference. And we also know that she's talked about this a lot before. She has asthma. She struggles in hot, humid conditions, which is what we're going to have here for the next week. So not the best of conditions for her. Paolini, like you mentioned, not a great hardcore player, but is going to make Kvitova work for points and things. Not really who you want to see there in your first round match if you're worried about the conditions at all. Kudermetova was the other name that I kind of had circled as another long shot here. Obviously, she's a big underdog to Muguruza, as she should be. Might lose that match 6-2, 6-2, but if she could get through that match, this is an easy section, and then she's in the quarterfinals with someone that she might be in good enough form to beat. She's like 100-1 at certain places, so that was another one that stuck out to me. But I've got Sabalenka playing Rybakina, and you're right. I've got Rybakina coming through here and beating. I think I picked Kudermetova just to be fun, but it's probably Rybakina over Muguruza if I had to really pick something here.
Yeah, and I suppose it goes without saying because I mentioned her so many times, but I do have Paolini beating Kvitova their first round. You kind of summed it up well. Not necessarily somebody who hardcourt is her preferred surface, but there are so many question marks about Kvitova given the conditions. So certainly that is a match that I would be looking to advise on, with Paolini being a very, very large underdog pretty much everywhere that I looked.
Let's jump into the third quarter. Wimbledon second place finisher Karolina Pliskova there, our seat at the top. Alina, apologies, they haven't updated all the draws. Monfils, not Svitolina, folks. She's actually changed her name all over the place. I'm wondering if I'm going to have to go through and change all my tennis data stuff at some point. But Miss Monfils down there at the bottom, Pliskova at the top. Again, as you go through here, Tomljanovic, Nina Stojanovic, Sakari Kontaveit could be a fun first-round match. Jennifer Brady back on hard courts. Hopefully she is healthy off a little plantar fasciitis. Ostapenko Vesnina could go one of any amount of ways. We'll see what Ons Jabeur can do against Carlos Suarez Navarro. This, to me, was the most wide-open quarter in the draw. I think, honestly, if I was going through, I could make a list of 6, maybe 8 names I could see winning the quarter. But who did you have picked?
Yeah, I completely agree. This was the quarter that when I got to it, I thought this looks like a lot of fun. I'm very excited. And, for me going through, as you mentioned, matches like Suarez Navarro against Ons Jabeur, that should be so much fun. Definitely one of the ones I have circled here for the first round. Ostapenko, always a little bit dangerous, and sometimes when you see her in these types of chaotic quarters as well, so someone to keep an eye on. But for me, it really came down to Jennifer Brady and Maria Sakkari. As you mentioned, Jen Brady, hopefully everything's okay with her foot. I have had plantar fasciitis before. It is awful. It hurts just to walk.
Yep.
So hopefully she's all good to go there, because this is a surface that certainly is going to test that. But I had her making her way through the quarter. So as long as she's healthy, I think this should be a quarter ripe for her. Obviously, you look for that potential showdown against Zachary, but we've seen Jen Brady have success against her in the past. So going to the American at the Olympics, USA.
I love it. I'm all for it. That sounds great. I would love for Jennifer Brady to win this. I have also had turf toe. That's the other name for plantar fasciitis. It's awful. It is. It's like you just can't. You don't even want to put your foot down. It's just the worst. So hopefully she's okay. But the name that I had circled coming out of here was Maria Sakkari. I think that she is in a nice spot in the draw here. Kontaveit is not the easiest first-round opponent, but Sakkari has handled her the last couple of times. She's been playing really well on hard courts. Her serve is much improved. The slower surface actually probably a little bit better for her movement because she still has the power to hit through it. Again, her toughest match is probably going to be in the third round against Monfils, but I think she's fine there. She's beaten her twice the last two times. She's beaten her the last two times they've played. She gets into the quarterfinals there. Then it's Brady. Maybe it's Ons Jabeur. Maybe even Karolina Pliskova, who we continue to kind of underestimate, even though she just finished second in the last Grand Slam. But I've actually got Jabeur coming out of that section, so I'm looking at a quarterfinal. Jabeur, Sakkari. I think Sakkari can take it, but has a little bit of an easier draw. So most of the reason for me backing Sakkari to win this quarter. But this one should be kind of fun.
Yes, and it still is so weird to say she'll be going against Monfils. It's going to take me a couple weeks to get used to. But kudos.
Monfils back in the top 10.
Yeah, kudos to her though. Like, as somebody who has been married before and changed my name, that usually is such an annoying, long process. So well done. She like steamrolled through that.
Yeah. That's probably pretty easy. Who knows if she filed the paperwork? You just change your Twitter name and everything's fine. Fourth quarter, Naomi Osaka, the lighter of the Olympic flame, her return to tennis. We hope. I mean, she's there. It'd be pretty wild if she didn't play after all that. I assume she will. She's down here at the bottom of the draw. You don't see too many names that may be scary at first, but Zhang's going to make her work. Golubic looming there in the second round, I think is going to be a lot more difficult than people expect. Maybe a little bit of a break there in the third round, unless maybe Vondrousova's found some form. Maybe Allison Risk feels like playing tennis this week. But when she gets to the quarterfinals, man, this is the toughest eighth of the draw, if you will. The top half of this quarter, Swiatek, Badosa, Podoroska, Alexandrova, Mertens, just an absolute murderer's row of great players in the WTA. Even Putintseva here coming off a title. Just a lot of talent in this top section. Maybe Osaka wins this quarter, but I think it's kind of whoever wins this top section. I think that although it's really tough, it's going to get that player into form. They're going to be playing well, whereas Osaka, I think, may still be a little bit distracted by everything else that's going on. And again, I'm not really excited to jump in and say she's going to rip through a tournament after not having played tennis for so long. So I actually have Swiatek coming out of this quarter. What do you think?
Interesting. Swiatek's very interesting to me. Again, another player who trying maybe over the course of the season to figure out where her head is at. So I don't have her coming out of the quarter, but I certainly understand, at least the raw talent and ability is there. I went a little rogue in this one, I must say. I completely agree with you that it's who comes through the top portion, but for me, coming out of the top is Mertens.
Mladenovic?
No, it's didn't go that rogue. It's Mertens. And obviously she has a couple of tough ones right off the bat, Alexandrova, and then potentially someone like Podoroska there in the second round. Not going to make things easy on her, but she just is that player, right? She's that model of consistency. I do think that these conditions should suit her, and for me, every time I'd go through matches, she was just the one who I kept coming back to that I didn't have a bunch of questions about, right? When I look to Swiatek, I'm like, where is she? Where's her head at? We've seen her have really great tournaments, and then we've seen things completely fall apart. Osaka, same idea. Where is she at right now? I don't know mentally where Naomi Osaka is at. And Mertens is just always that consistent figure. You know what you're going to get from her. I think if she makes it through that first round match, this is another player who it's first round is where things look very difficult. If she makes it through that first round match, I think she's very dangerous in this quarter. it's strange to say because she's always kind of that benchmark player against, the other women that we say, well, if you're good, you beat her, and if you're not good, then you don't. But I see her making a little bit of a run here.
I think she could. My problem is that first round match. I think
Yes, that's the
Alexandrova
concern.
kind of got her numbered there.
Yeah.
I actually think Podoroska is going to lose the first round. Putintseva is just a terrible matchup for her. Podoroska is someone that at her best can beat anybody, but if she's spraying errors, it's all over, and Putintseva is going to force her to do that. If I actually had to see somebody beating Swiatek here, I wonder what Badosa can do. It's been a little while since we've seen her play. Again, we've got a little bit slower hard courts, which can be better for her. Again, part of the reason I like Swiatek, I think being a little bit slower here is probably better for her. And she, that first match against Barthel, with all due respect to the German, should be pretty calm and simple for her. Whereas Badosa, even against Mladenovic, I mean, she could find her best tennis at a moment's notice. It's very odd, but yeah, it's.
I had Badosa beating her for what it's worth, so that's where we see the trouble point at the similar plays.
Absolutely. All right, I think that's just about all we have for the draw. Any other thoughts here before we jump into our picks?
No.
All right, let's get going there. We take a look here. Our picks to win the tournament. We'll start with Steve's here. I really like this, Steve. I wish you were here so I could clap for this. I really wish Aryna Sabalenka wins this. That would be awesome. I don't think it's going to happen, but hey, what the heck? Anything is possible. It's the WTA. And Candace, it's good that it's just you and I today. We are in full agreement on things. You picked Ashley Barty. I picked Ashley Barty.
Yes.
Again, she's the best player in the world probably at this point, arguably, depending on how Naomi Osaka's feeling this week. It is a tough draw, but it's not the worst section to be in for her. And she's got all the tools. So, Candace, I know you and I have talked a bunch about it, people that could knock her off, but you did pick her to win the tournament. So you think she gets it done?
I do. I think that, as you mentioned, I think she's in a really good spot in the draw, which is of utmost importance. She's in a really good spot in her quarter, let alone with everybody else. I mean, I know we didn't talk about it much, but I was a little worried, but mostly so impressed following her comments after Wimbledon of how her, injury was more severe than she even realized, and yet here she is winning majors. So obviously she's playing well, and she seems to be feeling well, which is most important at this stage. And she's really been a joy to watch recently. So I think that she's the one to win, of course.
She is, and we talk about her all the time. She can do just about anything well on a tennis court. She does still have those kind of mental lapse periods, whether it be a few points, a few games. We saw even in the Wimbledon final, she kind of wigged out for about half a set there in the second set to let Pliskova back in. But she still has so much talent to make up for that. And there really aren't a lot of women that can come out and play at a consistently high level. So, kind of just poking holes in something that doesn't really need it, picking nits, if you will. Let's jump into some of our value picks. Steve took Jennifer Brady. I know, Candace, you talked about her a little bit. I talked about her a little bit. One of the best hard court players on tour before getting injured there. So we'll see if she's back and healthy. You're getting a good number her, around 25-1 or better. Candace, your value pick, the one we just talked about, continuing this pattern of fourth quarter value, Elise Mertens.
Yeah, so I will say for Steve, totally understand the Jennifer Brady angle, of course. I liked her coming out of that quarter, but I went with Mertens. I mean, I mentioned a little bit, I just think she's in a quarter that looks very chaotic, and she's always that model of consistency. It's all about that first round match for her, of course. If she's able to make it past Alexandrova, I need to some Lin's form coming through there to make that one happen. But if she does, I think she can make a bit of a run. And you're talking about 40-1 is what I've seen for her around the board. Had I not put Mertens, I would have put Brady. And the only reason I didn't, it was the disparity in odds, right? I'm seeing Brady around 25-ish. I'm seeing Mertens a little bit more around 40. I think that's a little bit too big of a gap. So that was the only reason I went that way. But I completely agree with Steve as well with Brady.
Yep, and my pick, Maria Sakkari, again, coming out of that third quarter, she's right around 20-1. I think she is in one of the easiest quarters. She's in good form. These conditions should just be absolutely perfect for her, and I'm not too worried. I mean, Alina Monfils will be there in the quarterfinals, beating her twice. She's beaten Osaka, who might be there in the quarterfinals, and I think even challenged Swiatek. So really like Sakkari, like her spot at 20-1. I'll be adding her. And if you want to see the rest of my outright picks, make sure you find my preview. You can find it on Twitter at _Noops. It's over there at Ace Previews. I break down the draw and give you all my outright picks, although I hit it on most of them here. Now, Steve had an unforced error. His was Naomi Osaka. I guess he's given her a little bit of a break, given all the media stuff going on, given what it means for her to be there. Some people are excited and see a lot of opportunity in her with given all the attention, but there's the other side of that coin, Candace. I mean, that could be too much pressure for her. What do you think about what Steve was thinking here?
Well, I completely agree. I mean, we'll see in a minute that I completely agree, but I just think that there's a lot going on and there's a lot of pressure on her at the moment, not only about her tennis, but about everything she's doing and saying around tennis as well. I can only imagine how tough that is to handle. I mean, it's one thing if you feel pressure about playing tennis, and I'm not minimizing that at all. That's difficult as well. But if you're feeling pressure about what you're doing or saying in your entire life, which is what it kind of feels like with her, I can't imagine what that feels like. I mean, you're kind of walking on eggshells with everything that you're doing, no matter where you are, no matter if you're even playing tennis. And so I think she's really kind of treading the waters of how to handle all of that and how to, really be able to be vocal and show this more kind of confident side of her that we've seen these last couple of years. I think she'll make it through. She's a strong woman, and she's somebody who is so much more important to sports in the world than even just her tennis game gives us. But I'm just not sure that we're there or that she's ready yet for this specific tournament and for everything it would mean for her to win. I'd love to see it. I know a lot of people out there would love to see it, but again, when you're talking about it from who would you want to bet on, that's not the direction that I would be going. But I will say about Osaka, for people who have, and I assume most people who are watching this are people who've watched tennis for a long time, it has been, no matter if you agree with what she says or does or not, it's been a joy to watch her really come into her own. I still remember her from the very beginning and the very not so fun way that she made her way through winning her first major, and how shy she was and how uncomfortable she was, and just to see her come into her own and have a little bit of confidence and do all of that in such a public forum is been really nice to see, and I hope we get to see more of that from her going forward.
And we'll talk a little bit more in a second. But first, my unforced error, Kiki Bertens. I have a trivia question for you here, Candace. Ooh. In 2021, Kiki Bertens has played 9 tennis matches. How many sets has she won?
Sets. Matches.
How many sets has she won in 9 matches?
2.
Ooh, you undershot it. 5 was the answer.
Oh, man. I figured if you're bringing it up, it had to be like really low.
She does have 2 wins. She beat Jinyu Wang there in the Billie Jean King Cup and won her first round match against a wild card in Madrid. But the only other set she's won all year, she sucked one off Polona Herzog at the French Open. She has lost her last 4 matches. Maybe she'll win one. She probably won't. Good luck. All the best to her. I hope that, she saved her money and all that stuff. Seems like she has. I'm sure she'll be just fine. Not happening for her. Steve's overvalued player here, Garbiñe Muguruza. We talked about her a little bit. Kind of anything's possible with her, but she's always priced as if we're going to see the best Garbiñe Muguruza. We talked about her draw. It's very challenging, but she's still the 4th favorite. At 11-1, she's lower odds than Swiatek, Zachary, Pliskova, Krejcikova, Rybakina, people that are in better spots in the draw that have been playing a little bit better tennis as of late. So agree with Steve there. And Candace and I stacking hands here on the overvalued player, Naomi Osaka. Candace just did a great breakdown of kind of all the mental stuff, all the off-court things that are going on from an on-court perspective. Yes, she's a great hard-court player. Of course, she is capable of doing anything here. But she hasn't played tennis for quite some time, and I talked about that draw. I mean, Zheng is a player that she should absolutely beat. I mean, we're talking about there should be a bagel and a breadstick somewhere in there, but if Osaka's not at her best, Zheng's going to take advantage of errors and make her work. Golubic has had a sneaky great season, and I think could be competitive there. Vondrousova or Risk is going to make her work there in the 3rd round. And we have Swiatek in the quarterfinals. You add all that up, and you're looking at someone who's now 3-1 or less, depending on where you look.
Well, and I think it's telling too that we both had her listed as overvalued player when we made these picks yesterday. So this was before the opening ceremonies, and she's come in even more since then. So even more of an issue now.
We could have had some 4-1s, I think, yesterday and stuff. So it's starting to come down from less than 3. People are excited. They should be. We have Olympic tennis, and it's a lot of fun. But that's all we got, folks. That's everything. We'll be back soon to talk about some more tournaments, maybe even come back to do a little bit of tennis there. Please, if you can, give us a like, a rating, a review on whatever you're watching. Subscribe to the podcast because, of course, this goes right out as podcast almost immediately afterwards. To be honest, folks, I don't know how to do that, and Steve's still asleep, so this one might be a little bit delayed, but I'll see if I can figure it out. Otherwise, thanks again for watching. We'll see you soon.